Welcome to another edition of Voice of the Diaspora. We have a very, very special guest in studio today, Mr. Mark Anthony Benschop, who is currently one of Guyana's leading radio hosts. Mr. Benschop is a political activist. He has been a political prisoner, and he is considered the foremost, not one of, but the foremost political activist in Guyana or that Guyana has ever seen. Mr. Benschop has inspired a generation and generations in relation to activism. And that came about because the government of the day was one that had become a dictatorship, that did not respect the people of the country, that were involved in extrajudicial killings and corruption at the highest level, and the voices of the people were silenced. And Mr. Benschop would have come on the scene and challenged the powers that be and created a revolution in Guyana, which would have eventually set the landscape for the PPP to tumble after 23 years in office. Mark Anthony Benschop, it is a pleasure, it is a privilege, it is a honor to have you here on live, on Voice of the Diaspora. How are you feeling?
Hi, Mr. Brown. Good to be here. I know in London it's afternoon. In Eastern Standard Time, it's just approaching midday. Thank you so much for this invite. And in fact, when you made contact with me, it's Sunday morning. I said to you that I'm a deacon of a Facebook church. And I made a joke about that deacon
Shrimpy.
stuff. Yes, DJ Shrimpy. He has me walking around with a basket and to collect the hearts and the love and to show appreciation. So that's the form of deacon that I'm talking about. And so it is a pleasure, even though it's approaching midday, and I set whatever aside to be here with you to answer whatever questions you have in mind and to remind listeners about those dark days under the PPP's rulership.
Thank you, and I want to thank you again for taking the time to come on this program. You have walked the walk. You have walked the walk. You have faced persecution at the hand of the PPP Civic under the rulership of Mr. Barjagdi and also under the rulership or presidencies of Mr. Barjagdi and Donald Ramatar. You have stood up and you had confronted that government. You would have paid one of the ultimate prices, being imprisoned, and of course there were attempts made on your life and you know every step you took it was under surveillance, but you created a revolution in Guyana that some young people, 19-year-old and 20-year-old now, would not have a first-hand knowledge of. How did that all started?
Well, it started, there's a particular scripture. It now is one of my favorite scriptures. It says, in life at times, and this is just paraphrasing it, Proverbs 3:5 says, lean not on thine own understanding. And I'm saying this maybe because it's Sunday. And in life, when you lean on your own understanding, you just don't know, you wouldn't have a better understanding, neither would you have a grip as to what your calling is. And from a very young age, I've realized that my calling is to represent people, is to stand up and fight against any form of injustices. I've always been this way. People who know me, whether, not much in Linden, because I'm originally from Linden, but I was taken out in the quarantine when I was a little boy. And so most of my memories, would have to do with growing up on the quarantine, even though I remember as a little boy being in Wisma, being at the Mackenzie Sports Club, being, at the riverfront there on Bornham Drive and all these different things. So I have fond memories of Linden. However, being on the quarantine and going to school there, I remember, whatever it is, the teachers always used to say that, Mark, why do you have to be the one who has to stand up and always represent something, always defend somebody? And I've always been that way. So it is consistent with my behavior. It is consistent with my passion for standing up and helping people. And so when I saw that in Guyana that people were being taken advantage of because of their ethnicity, because of maybe their political affiliation, or maybe because they just don't have what it takes to stand up for themselves. And I have taken upon my own, with the strength, of course, of God, because I'm a believer, that this is the right thing to do. You don't have to do it for a brown paper bag. You don't have to do it for monies. You don't have to do it for wealth. Just do it because it is the right thing to do. And anyone who knows me know that nobody can pay me to go out and do things and to say things that contrary to my beliefs or contrary to what is right. And so, the my record stands for itself, that I stand up, I represent what is wrong. And in doing so, when you do that, Norman, those who believe that you're interfering with their brown paper bag, they become agitated, they become upset, and so they will want to describe you as a troublemaker. They will want to describe you as all sort of things, representing criminals, representing black people. They want to describe you as a racist, all sort of things, and I've heard it all. Throughout the process, I've heard it all. And it doesn't affect me because I know who those individuals are. I know what they're about. And I know basically their interest is more self interest, what they can grab for themselves. But I just added that in just basically wrapping up in answering that first part of your question as to how I became involved. I became involved, to wrap this up, is that in the Bible it says, when you see an injustice is meted out to your brother or your sister, and you turn a blind eye, you're equally as guilty as the perpetrators. And now I don't want to be guilty of anything. And so when I see a wrong that's being done, regardless of your ethnicity, because on the ground in Guyana, I stood up with a few others to represent people. We don't, when someone calls, we don't ask, are you Indian? Are you African? Are you indigenous? Are you Portuguese? As long as we hear that it's an injustice, we are there. And that describes me. And I hope that answers your question.
It answers the question. But let us look back and let us look back on that journey, that you had embarked upon. You were called courageous. You were called fearless, and those descriptions were, they belong to you because it wasn't a kudos. It was what you were, what you had become. And you had done that in a time when police, the repressive arm of the government, were killing African Guyanese and Guyanese as a whole. People were afraid to speak out for fear of being killed, for fear of being persecuted. For people to understand what was happening, the country had descended into a narco state where you had former policemen, former soldiers who would have been recruited under the Jack Dios regime. And I'm not saying allegedly, they were recruited, and you know this better. And so life was fleeting for many at that time, and so the nation was plunged into a quiet state. And at that time, you were one of the only voices, if not the foremost voice, that was standing up to that dictatorship. How did you feel? What was that extra oomph that made you stand up in such a dangerous environment? Were you not afraid that you would be killed? Did you put the rights of the people, justice, before yourself? Tell the young people today how you felt, what you were confronted with, what are some of the debaucheries that you would have fought against under Mr. Jagdio's PPP, under Mr. Ramatar's PPP.
All right. Let me say that indeed, being in a struggle, a political struggle, and fighting against oppressors, and oppressions, and being persecuted, and all these sort of things. It is not something that just happens just like that. And even if you go into that aspect of your life, you cannot stand for a moment and say that you're going to be afraid, or you're afraid if you're locked up, or you're afraid to go to jail. You just cannot do that. You have to go into it knowing very well that there will be sacrifices, that there will be situations that will confront you, that you have to be prepared for. You have to be prepared for jailing. You have to be prepared to be locked up. You have to be prepared for your life to be threatened. You have to be prepared for them to plan your assassination, and assassination being the operative word here, because I've noticed that even some of the soup drinkers and the brown paper baggers, the flatfoot hustlers, probably would love to have seen me assassinated. And I say this too now, um, and a bit of correction, and this is just from me, but you're entitled to your opinion, of
Mm,
course, and I respect that. That during those dark days, there were just a few of us
yeah.
indeed. And I wasn't a lone soldier on the ground, so to speak. There were other persons who put their lives at risk. Their lives were threatened. There was Roger Moore, who is now deceased. He had his show, and he was also fearless. There was Basil Bradshaw, who did his show. He was also fearless. There was Clem David, who's also now deceased. Clem David was also fearless. There were quite a few others during those dark days, and to mention Ronald Waddle, who was
Yeah.
assassinated, and I'm sure some of the house individuals, and those brown paper baggers and those flatfoot hustlers who love to talk about people being assassinated and who should have been assassinated and all these things. I bet they probably were partying when people like Ronald Waddle was assassinated and Courtney Crummy Wing and so forth were assassinated. Now I say that because I knew early o'clock that in getting out of this game alive, that you have to be fearless, you have to be careful. Also, you have to have an understanding of your environment. And I knew of my environment. I knew that the regime then, the Jagdeo regime, wanted to get their guys to get rid of me. In fact, the
They
former
wanted to kill
police,
you.
yeah, the former police commissioner, Larry Lewis, admitted to me, he's now dead, admitted to me on his dying bed that they were quote unquote businessmen. They were powerful PPP people who approached him and asked him, how can we get rid? How can we kill? How can we assassinate Mark Benschop? The former commissioner of police said that. He admitted that to me. I have that on video. So this is not a program that I take opportunity on your show this morning to spread some sort of propaganda. It came right out of the mouth of Commissioner of Police Larry Lewis. And so I knew that I had to be fearless. I knew that I had to be prepared for the lockups. I knew that I had to be prepared for police harassment. Of course, there was a heck of a lot of that. I knew that I had to be prepared to be to become a political prisoner, or the ultimate price for the dictatorship was assassination. And I wasn't afraid of those things at all. I have been locked up dozens of times, dozens upon dozens of times, charged with some of the, or some, not just the highest charges, um, from treason to sedition to attempted to commit murder on the very Commissioner of Police, Larry Lewis. All frivolous charges, tons of charges for illegal protest. Mind you, standing up for people's rights.
All right.
If they gun down somebody in Agricola, I was there unlawfully, that is. If they unlawfully, the police, that is, if they extrajudicially kill someone, I am there to stand up with the family, to hold their hands, to march with them to Georgetown, in front of Ivlery, in front of the office of the president, wherever, to seek justice for those individuals. If they gun down somebody, as in the case of a Shaka Blair, a lot of your listeners may remember Shaka Blair out in Buxton. The police went into this man's house, murdered him cold bloodedly in front of his wife, in front of his children, right? Those are things that I stood up for. And if I have to do it all over again, I'll do it. And for doing what I did, standing up for people's rights, I have absolutely no apologies to make to
It's
no one, including the brown paper baggers.
it's ironic that you mentioned Shaka Blair, who was brutally gunned down in Buxton, I think. And it's ironic you mentioned that because his brother was on a program last night, and his view was that Mark Benschop should have been assassinated by the PPP government. His brother would have made that statement. But I want to ask you about the events leading up to your imprisonment, that wrong imprisonment, because I want us to take this conversation into modern day, into today, how you would be feeling at the moment about the PPP going back into office and so on. After all those sacrifices were made by yourself and by Ronald Waddle, and the others that you've mentioned, Basil Bradshaw in the media, Roger Moore, the late Roger Moore, and a number of others. And I did say that I consider you the foremost political activist of that time, meaning that there were others. Look, you were arrested in the vicinity of the office of the president, I think under Mr. Jagdio's presidency. I don't recall what year it is. This is an impromptu show, so I didn't get to do the research to put things together. But these are renowned stories. You were there at a protest, doing what you do, and you were singled out by Mr. Jagdio, not because you were at that protest that would have descended into the police, killing people within the complex of the office of the president, and they're saying that people would have stormed there to try to overthrow the government and so on. You were down there, and you were doing what you were doing in terms of protests and talking to people and so on, and you were singled out and arrested and put in prison for almost 5 years, taken away from your family, and others who were on the run never faced that sort of persecution. Tell the young people today briefly what happened there. Give us a brief synopsis of how it happened, when it happened, and how you ended up in prison for 5 years unjustly.
Well, in addressing first the ridiculous statement uttered by Shaka Blair's brother, I'll just leave it as that, because when people have to sing for the supper, they will do all sorts of things. They will wine on the table, they will do lap dance, all sorts of things just to get their supper. And at times, they're not responsible for the ridiculous statements coming out of their mouth. To suggest that someone should have been assassinated because of standing up for rights. And I stood up for his brother's rights. I stood up for his family's rights. I don't know what happened during that process to him and his family and why he had to be chased out of Buxton. I don't know. And I'm not going to get involved with that because that individual is inconsequential. But for someone who sits as a director on a state board, earning taxpayers' monies, to make these sort of irresponsible statements, maybe only in Guyana under Jack Deos, under the PPP government, that those things can happen. Any other part of the world, that individual would have been sacked, he would have been sent home with immediate effect. Now, moving on, whatever transpired, whatever happened at the office of the president on that day, July 3rd, 2002, I would,
2002.
with all due respect, ask that maybe you will have your good friend Philip Bino to explain what really happened,
Yeah.
right, before I got there. But what happened is there was a large protest, I heard. something that was established that I had nothing to do with, something that was established that I joined the protest. And in fact, whatever happened at the office of the president happened before I got there. 5 or 10 minutes before I got there. That was an established fact. It was proven in court. Now, when I got there on the scene, after the gunshots and so forth and so on, and I heard that people were shot, I my blood was boiling because I thought that that was wrong, that that was cold-blooded murder, that you have persons who were protesting in the vicinity of the office of the president. And because people were expressing themselves about an injustice that has happened to them in terms of workers having their rights being violated, bauxite workers and so forth. And there it is that you have people standing up and exercising their rights, and possibly, because like I said, I wasn't there the minutes that those things happened, shaking the office of the president's gate. The gate was miraculously left open. I don't know for what reason. And then because of people inside of the compound, they weren't armed. They had no guns. They had no knives. They had no cutlass. They had absolutely no weapons. The presidential guards, and those are the trigger happy, inexperienced, untrained so-called presidential guards at the office of the president, were instructed to open fire and kill those protesters. And when I got there on the scene and I heard of that, I was upset. I was visibly upset because you cannot live in a country where persons are murdered, persons are slaughtered in that manner. There was no justified reason for murdering those protesters. However, the fact that I was on the scene after, and I saw Roger Luncheon, the then head of the Presidential Secretariat, standing at the window, along with then Minister of Agriculture, or maybe at that time he was Minister of or Information or whatever, Robert Passat. And I urged them to do something and to stop the presidential guards from shooting people. I did that. And so the then government saw that as an opportunity, that here it is that you have Benschop, who was a thorn in the eyes of the PPP and Jack Deere's presidency, to fabricate some sort of charge against me. It didn't happen right there and then. And just let me just divert quickly. There were numerous attempts in order to fabricate charges against me so that I can be lost away in prison. They have approached magistrates, they have approached judges as to how, and asking magistrates and judges to find or to ensure that when I'm charged with whatever it is, that I'm locked away in prison. They've approached a then magistrate by the name of Dawn Holder Alert. She admitted that publicly to me. Members in the public on my show heard that. And so this is nothing where I'm fabricating things. They've approached police officers to do whatever that is necessary to charge. They've approached other individuals as to discussing ways how can they get rid of Mark Benschop. And getting rid, I really do mean getting rid of. And so on that day, July 3rd, 2002, of which it was established in court that there was no evidence, none whatsoever, that I ever planned, nor had I instigated anyone to enter the office of the president. But like I said, in a subsequent interview, maybe you can interview your friend Philip Bino. So on that day, I was not arrested. Senior police officers who knew that the PPP had a plan, and their plan was now to use that event at the office of the president. They call it a so-called storming. There wasn't a storming. There wasn't an invasion. The gate was left open. There were protesters. They were shaking the gate. They were asking for someone to come out and have a talk with them about their problems. And the regime was so heartless under Jack Deere. Then, as it is now, we're seeing similar signs. They do not care about people. They do not care about the rights of people. They do not care how people survive. And make it worse yet, all of the people But what is interesting is that if you're a person of African descent, you get it in wrong for you. Really, really wrong. Hard times are ahead. Now, senior police officers indicated to me that leave. They want to arrest you. And I left. So I was not arrested on that day.
Yeah.
So they had several days for them to fabricate something against me. And the something that they fabricated was, which included myself, is they charged about 20 something of us for some breaking down the office of the president's gate. That is all. They charged many of us, including Ronald Waddle. And and eventually they decided that, look, it's got to be treason.
Mhm.
We've got to find the biggest charge for Mark Benschop. Forget about your friend Philip Bino. He wasn't the target. He wasn't a threat. He wasn't a thorn in their eyes. Whatever he was to them, I don't know. Maybe you'll have to ask him that. But the main target was obviously me.
It was you.
Uh,
It was you.
yeah,
Of course,
yeah.
Mr. Bino is not here, and of course, when it happened, he was the organizer of that protest, and he was on the run, allegedly on the run for a very long time, for a number of years, and of course, you spent about 5 years in prison, and you would have, you would have suffered. You spent most of that time in solitary confinement. What I want the viewers to hear from you just after we would have had a look at this clip, um you had suffered, you had been persecuted. What I want the viewers to hear from you is whether this was the work of President Barra Jagdeo, whom you would have been a thorn in his side. Because we will talk about today, we will talk about the 5 years of the coalition's rule and how we arrive back to this point with the same PPP criminals in office that yourself, Lincoln Lewis, Waddle, who paid the price with his life, you paid an ultimate price going to prison. Lincoln Lewis stood up and was persecuted. Crummy Wing died challenging the then Attorney General Anil Nandalal. And today, the reality is that the PPP is back in office. So I wanted to ask you two questions, but let us go to this short clip for the young people to see what some of the history were when people are saying maybe we should support the PPP today.
That one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed.
When I came through the gate as a free man, it was new to me. I was never sentenced, really, It's just that the ruling party didn't like the fact that I was highlighting a lot of the ills in society in terms of shortchanging the ordinary man, injustices, extrajudicial killings, and all these things. Was pain. There were lots of pain from within, knowing that my family had suffered. Walking out on that day, having not been out for several years, being locked up, locked away, hardly get sunlight. It was new for me. That said, I was very hesitant to accept the pardon because I felt that, hey, I never committed any crime. The government knows that. I decided, and upon hundreds of prisoners saying, Benschop, you've been in prison for a while, you've been locked away in solitary confinement. Accept the pardon, man. You could go out here and you could help fight for us. Haven't been away from my son for about 5 years. That it's time that he has his dad back with him. So I made that decision that I'm going to go out there, continue fighting against injustices and continue fighting for the people, and also get to reunite my son.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed.
So many comments in the comments section. So the young people and the viewers would have had a look at when you look back at being, torn away from your family, being locked in solitary confinement, being persecuted for years, knowing that you were innocent, knowing that no court had found you guilty, knowing that Mr. Barajagdio, the micromanager of the PPP, the owner and the leader of the PPP then and now, knowing that he would have taken away a large chunk of your life. What do you have to say to the young people now about the People's Progressive Party and what they are saying to African Guyanese and poor Guyanese, even people in their own constituencies who are suffering, that they are a new PPP that will transform Guyana?
They're not. This current PPP is not a new PPP that would transform Guyana. Jack Davis is still the leader of the PPP. Irfan Ali is a mere puppet. And when you look at the others around there, the miscreants, the vagabonds, the political vagabonds that are there, who should have been sitting in probably the very cell that I was in at the Camp Street prison there, um, they're still there. They're in power now, albeit under questionable circumstances. There is really no bright future, and I don't see any reasonable thinking guys and that will look up to these so-called leaders of the PPP, these so-called current leaders of the PPP. Because when you have a president charged 19 fraud charges, 19 fraud charges, or someone who sits there as the president, 19 fraud charges. I understand that this allegation, there are allegations from questionable acts during his term as Minister of Housing and so forth and so on. I'm talking about Irfan Ali.
Mhm.
Then, away from the 19 fraud charges, questionable academic credentials. You know, young people, young people are not going to be looking up to these sort of individuals as leaders. At least not most of the young people of Guyana. Now, when you look at an individual, Barra Jagdeo, and his iron fist rule of Guyana, the dictator that he is, you would wonder, especially when they speak and they try to give this impression as though they are all about Guyana. It's all about a one Guyana. It's all about the betterment and the development of Guyana. It is not. It is just not. They are not concerned about young people. They are not concerned about the development of Guyana. They're not concerned about the development of your community, my community, our communities. They're just not. All they're concerned about is filling their pockets, getting richer and richer and richer, getting big fat bank accounts, maybe in other parts of the world, maybe in China, maybe in other parts of the world that will accept their bank accounts and these sort of things. It is something that I consider to be unacceptable under any normal circumstances. So I don't know what young people are going to be impressed with them. However, when they talk about developments, the kind of developments they're talking about, maybe going into Region 10, maybe Linden, maybe Ituni, and so forth, and give a couple of the guys them a little pocket change to clean drains and all these different things. That is not development. And the funny thing is, though, Norman, is that when the PPP out with their trickery to do these sort of things, there are a few folks. I call them flatfoot hustlers, and this is not knocking anybody who wants to hustle. It's okay, you can hustle, but some of them are hustling, and in the name of hustling, they jump on social media and they portray themselves or the PPP as wanting to do something for their community, and they don't know that there's a catch to it, right? They're thinking about themselves. It is private politicking. That is what they're doing. And so they come with a paintbrush and they attempt to paint the picture that them in care, and this is the usual line, mind you, them in care who is in office, them in care who the government is. As long as the community is developed, they're okay with that. That's a trick. Don't buy into that. They're hustlers, right? And they're trying to brainwash some of the folks who are gullible into believing that the PPP actually cares about your community, about my community, about Guyana. They just do not care. Take, for example, let's talk about Linden. The PPP jumped up and they said that they have an investment of $200 million for a concrete factory. And now here's the big scheme. Here's the scam in that. Young people of Linden are not going to benefit from that. The people of Linden are not going to benefit from that, save and except they're going to hire a couple of youngsters to go and mix cement and to make a little blocks and to fetch cement bags. That's all they're going to do. And the bulk of the money, the hundreds of millions that they want to make, will go into their friends and their family's pocket. Like, for example, the man who's opening the cement factory, he already said that he wants a big chunk out of the so-called 1,000 houses that Irfan Ali said he wants to build somewhere out there in Linden. And then they have what is called a lumber yard and all these different things out there in Linden. Look at who owns it. Look at who is benefiting. So I don't want any flatfoot hustler who is making the little pocket change, might have gotten a little contact with these people in the install regime, might have gotten their little gun license, so they feel they're powerful now, and these sort of things. I don't want to hear that. So in wrapping up and answering your question, there's nothing, Norman Brown, absolutely nothing that young people can look at this current install regime, at this current individual who sits there as the president of the country, and to be impressed with. Absolutely nothing about. So I don't know. We've got to pray for Guyana under these catfish guys. We've got to pray.
It is very important to ask you this question and to give a brief backdrop about why this question is being asked, because it's the burning question at the moment. When you look back at the sacrifices you made, like the sacrifices Lincoln Lewis, Ronald Waddle died, you guys were there very early, building that foundation that would eventually cause the demise of the PPP. You are still around and you are still continuing your activism. You've got a radio station and you have been very fearless on your program in terms of helping to see the demise of the People's Progressive Party. You, like myself, would have endorsed the coalition, even though we had remained objective in pointing out missteps that would have happened. The coalition got power on the backs of activists and caring, concerned, courageous, and very strong Guyanese, men and women. Sharma Solomon comes to mind, Mark Anthony Benschop comes to mind, James Bond comes to mind, Christopher Jones comes to mind, and a lot of people outside of party politics. Lincoln Lewis comes to mind. Even Freddie Kissoon, would have been a part of that struggle. Many people felt, Mark, very early in the coalition government's tenure, many people felt that it was becoming worse for them. The supporters, they felt that it was becoming worse for them. The hope and the aspirations and that wave of energy that would have caused the PPP to fall and for the coalition to assume office was dampened very early in the coalition's rule. And we see the machinations that occurred to bring about that demise. I want people to understand, because there are people looking at us from across the world. There's a lot of comments in the section. I think you can see the comments too. I want people to understand that we don't come to make things up. Weeks before, Charandas would have moved a no confidence motion that would have eventually brought the coalition government down. You told me that it would be Charandas. You told me weeks on weeks before, and that you said to me, I think you should throw that out there. For some reason, I didn't throw it out there, and I really regret not throwing. Do you remember that conversation? But the bigger question, so we tie in everything, is when you saw the performance of the coalition, when you saw the sidelining of persons who would have been in that struggle to see the PPP out of office. And I want to say this on this program because I have the freedom and latitude to say it in this program. It is my opinion that the coalition has been very ungrateful to people like yourself, to Sharma Solomon, and to the Vanessa Kissoons, and to many persons, Lincoln Lewis and other people that would have sacrificed. If you guys were, and no one is looking for position, but if you were given your just dues, the coalition would have been in office still. Are you disappointed? There's so many questions in one. I know you were able to do it. Are you disappointed with what transpired under the Granger Harmon's leadership? Are you convinced that as opposition leader, Mr. Harmon can take us into a victory? Would you suggest and recommend also that all of those who have been sidelined be brought back and be given that power to re-engineer this struggle and to take the government again away from the People's Progressive Party? Your time to talk.
Thank you. I've noted 21 questions from you.
You know, we pack everything in. We've got a 20 minutes.
That's what people from Linden actually do. They just think. The coalition in the beginning made some very big mistakes. Part of that mistake was to isolate individuals who would have been part of a struggle. Mm-hmm. Individuals who weren't after any position. At least I can speak on my own behalf, mm-hmm. and I can also possibly speak on Lincoln Lewis' behalf, because Lincoln and I are very close. We have mm-hmm. been in the struggle for many, many years, and someone that I have tremendous respect for. I've known him since I was a little boy on the quarantine. Fighting for workers' rights. So someone that I'm familiar with and I have a tremendous amount of respect for. And I'm not painting him here as a perfect individual. I'm not saying that all of his struggle would have been perfect. However, having said that, I do believe that in the beginning of President Granger's administration, that individuals who would have made sacrifices should not have been isolated, should not have been left out. They have left practically everyone out. And well, save and except Christopher Ram got a position on some board. I don't know if he was offered positions or whatever. There were individuals who were given positions. I never asked for position. I never asked to be in any ministry. And I'm saying this publicly. And you know, I'm not afraid of any sort of contradiction, because there's no evidence. No one can say under President Granger's administration that I've ever asked for any position, and I never wanted any position. Were they to have offered a position that's something that I'd like, that I know that if I'm being paid $100 or $100,000 to do, that it would be in the interest of mobilizing the people and not filling my pockets. However, I should say that there was one person who offered me several positions, and my correction on that. I was sitting in Moses Nagamutu's office, then Prime Minister, and he offered me something to do. He offered to put me on a particular state board, and he offered me to do something with NCN. However, I declined both offers, and I'm saying this publicly for the first time, that then Prime Minister Moses Nagamutu offered me, and he's the only person, and there's a reason why I'm saying he's the only person that ever offered me something. And I am also saying this publicly, that I declined the offer to be on a state board and to do some programs at NCN. That was all. And so I've looked at the manner in which it started governing, I observed early o'clock, lots of arrogance. A lot of people got too big in a matter of a month, big shots. I've realized that that would probably be a downfall because you do not just get into office and behave in that manner. I also recall that when they gave themselves, some of them, a 50% raise, uh, there were a few of us who were speaking out against that because we knew that that was wrong. Why was it wrong? Because you get into office. It is not so much about your salary. It is not so much about your benefits, but what you can do to serve the people, overall the people. Majority are poor people, majority of working class people who voted for you, who got up early in the morning, voted for you to be in office, voted for you to represent their interests, not your personal interest, not your friend's interest. And when I saw some of the ministers of the coalition heading in that direction, I thought that it was a recipe for serious disaster down the road. And so the 50% increase was a quick shot in the foot, isolating persons who were there in the struggle long before they ever thought of gaining power. I thought that those individuals should have been treated with some sort of respect. It isn't. It is not that people were looking for positions. At least I wasn't. And when I started to constructively bring these things out in the public forum on my page, I was called by some of the APNU AFC supporters. Don't worry, Benschop bitter because he can get position and all of these things. So I've heard it. And the very people who criticize me are the very ones who are criticizing the party right now for the same thing that I brought to their attention, not in any malicious way, not in a way that I wanted to see the coalition do bad, or not in a way that I wanted to see the coalition out of office, but because I'm an activist. I'm a human rights and social activist. And when I see these sort of wrong things and I bring it to your attention, it's that you have to correct it. And some of those things were corrected, but I think to some extent the damage was already done because when you isolate individuals, people get to believe that they're not wanted, they're useless, and when they get that feeling that they're useless, then sometimes people cannot control their emotions. They act out.
Hmm.
Freddie Kissoon is acting out because he felt isolated. He felt
Thank
that he
you.
wasn't wanted, right? Christopher acted out because he felt as though he was useless. There were all sorts of things, to describe those individuals in the beginning. I didn't jump on the bandwagon, but as of now, if you ask me if Freddie Kissoon has gone overboard with his criticism, yes, he has
Yes.
gone totally overboard, and uncontrollable. They Lincoln Lewis started to act out and act out in a very constructive and responsible way. He started to do those things along with David Hines and others. Not that they hated the coalition, but they wanted the coalition to correct the errors that they were making and to go into the communities, go into where their constituencies are, and to do things, not just for their constituencies, but for the entire country.
Country.
And so that was the agenda. We were cursed out all sorts of things. And then even with the Charan Das situation, I brought it to your attention. I told you, I said, Norman, run with it because I got this from a source. I don't want them to feel as though I am the one that is peddling it, but I gave that information to other folks way ahead
Yeah.
of time. I say, run with this information. I subsequently called some of them in government there. I believe, including then Minister of Security, now Minister of Home Affairs, they changed it back to Ramjatan. And I brought that to Ramjatan's attention. I said, you guys have got to do something about this. Because if it is I am where I am, and I'm hearing about this individual that's going to walk into the parliament and vote against a government that actually put money in his pocket
Okay.
as a member of parliament, to vote a government that had confidence. The people that elected that party were looking up on people like Charandas to go and do something in their communities. He was a representative there for Region 6. He did not a goddamn thing. He was one of the most incompetent, selfish, foolish member of parliament. And only God knows why is it that Charan Das was made the representative for Region 6. It was Charan Das who, in a meeting when they wanted to form the coalition, walked out, and allegedly said that he doesn't want anything to do with quote unquote black people. Is this a guy that you're going to put to sit there as a member of parliament? You know, Norman, and to all your listeners, I'm not here to bash the coalition. I'm not going to do that. I'm just pointing out some of the errors made,
One
mind
second.
you.
One comment came through that said, responding to what you were saying, hold your point. And they are still being, that's the coalition, and they're still being stubborn and not listening to their supporters. And so persons are agreeing with what you're saying here. Someone just said in response to what you're saying, and still they are being stubborn. And I'm glad that comment came through. Because I want to ask, you have rubbed shoulders, you have met very, very powerful human rights leaders worldwide. You met Nelson Mandela. You met our great black leader in America, Reverend Al Sharpton. You met Colin Powell, who was, a general in one U.S. government. You have met so many people, and so you would feel or sense the aura. That's yourself there. My viewers can see you there with Nelson Mandela. Also, that's you there protesting, still carrying the fight. That's yourself with Nicole Cole calling on the government to respect women's rights on the job. You are still being very active. That's you there talking about the heartless investors. You are still in the struggle. I wanted to find. Okay, that's yourself there on Al Sharpton. And Al Sharpton is known today to many young people across the world after the killing of Floyd in the United States of America. So you have met with powerful leaders. And this is a very serious question. I'm not throwing shade on anyone or anything. When you are in the presence of the leader of the opposition, and it is very important that we have a strong leader of the opposition at this juncture, do you sense an aura when you listen or look at him or see what he's doing in the area of his work? Do you feel inspired? Do you believe that there is a chance under his leadership to take this struggle and to return the coalition back into office very soon?
One of the things in answering that question is leaders are not perfect individuals. No one is perfect. Leaders do not know it all. But what they do, they surround themselves with competent individuals, not square pegs in round holes and so forth. Mr. Harman might be lacking in some political areas, maybe organizing and these sort of different things, but it doesn't mean that because someone is lacking in those areas that they cannot be effective. They can be effective if they are surrounded by competent individuals. And good leaders build good team. Good leaders build a good and strong, competent team, members who can go out there and articulate the vision of that particular leader. What Mr. Harman needs to do is and I'm not saying that he doesn't have a couple of them around him, but what he needs to do is to build a very strong, competent team, a team that is people's oriented, a team that understands the struggle, that understands the plight of the people, and share a vision for a true Guyana. It needs to be done like that. And I'm not going to sit here and say whether Harman can bring victory or anybody can bring victory. Anybody can bring victory if they have a good team, if they are committed. And one of the things that Mr. Harman has to do, though, and I'll say this publicly, that they have to keep beating the drums every single day, every minute of the day. There is no time for recreation. They have to go out there. They have to beat the drums. They have to hit the streets. And if they're serious about properly confronting this illegitimate PPP regime, they have to be more forceful, but of course, in a non-violent way, mind you. They have to be out there. Press release alone is not going to suffice. Press conference alone is not going to suffice. They need to reorganize and they need to repackage themselves properly in an acceptable way so that supporters of their parties who are just peeping, who might be fed up, are sometime soon going to be impressed to say, you know what? I like this fight. I like what they're doing. I like what they're saying. They're out there. They're protesting in all of the regions. They're not allowing this PPP regime to basically, keep them on their back foot or whatever, so to speak. They are being proactive. And that is what the current leadership of the opposition needs to start doing. Be very proactive, not emotional and throw tantrums whenever it's necessary. I'm not pointing at any particular person with this, but they just need to be more proactive, action oriented, get the struggle going. To sit down and press conferences and just press release or to click on a Facebook live and go live, that is not going to move the PPP. It is not going to move them at all. And so, Mr. Harman is not the perfect opposition leader. He's not the perfect leader. No one is perfect. In answering directly your question, does he inspire me? I have worked along with him in the past. He has been there with us, Waddle and myself, and a few others. We started in 2001, an organization that's called Citizens Against Police Oppression. And those were some brutal years, brutal, dark years of the PPPC. When folks were afraid to speak out, nobody wanted to speak out at all because people were dying. Like flies in
Left,
the
right,
street.
and center.
People were being tortured. Young Black men were being rounded up in their communities and locked up, fabricated charges against them, wrongfully charged for murders and all these different things. Guyana was under siege, right? And so at that time, Joe Harman, that's when I got to know him personally. He got involved in an organization with us that myself and Waddle formed, that we were going to confront police brutality. The name of that organization was Citizens Against Police Oppression. And so Joe Harman showed signs that he was willing to fight. That is the Joe Harman I want to see now again. That is the Joe Harman citizens and supporters of the coalition want to see. A fighting Joe Harman. This reminds me, Norman, and your listeners, this reminds me of President Hugh Desmond Hoyt, who later became the opposition leader. Mr. Hoyt didn't have this personality that if you stand next to him that you believe that he's going to hit the streets and fight for you. He was seen more of a kind of like an uppity kind of
conservative sort of, yeah.
Very conservative. I recall I took Mr. Hoyt around in Brooklyn and Queens, and when I took him to Brooklyn on Church Avenue, there were some ex-army and police guys, Guyanese guys, who said to me, "Mark, what are you bringing the man here for? The man don't come down and talk to we, the ordinary people. How come you managed to get a guy there?" Right? There might have been some truth to that. But the point that I'm making is the people eventually in 1997, it is the people who grabbed Mr. Hoyt. Not necessarily physically, they grabbed him and placed him in a position of reality that you have to come down there, you have to march, you have to take the lead, you have to represent our interests, you have to fight for us. And in closing off your question, supporters of the coalition, instead of bashing Joe Harman and others, the rightful thing to do, I'm not saying then that some of the criticisms aren't justified. They are justified. However, as supporters of the coalition, they need to grab the hands of Joe Harman and bring him onto the streets and say, this is how we want you to represent our interests. We want you to take the lead. We want you to fight our interests. We want you to take the battle to the PPP. Because if you don't do that, all of us are going to be destroyed. Not just supporters of the party, but the entire country will be destroyed. Because, Norman, I am seeing signs of those dark days returning again. Because when you have idiots who sit on state boards, could go live on social media and say that they wished for somebody, or the PPP should have assassinated this person. This person should have been killed under the PPP. It is not a good sign.
It is not a
It
good
is just
sign,
not
and I
a good
do
sign.
agree. It is not a good sign. Let me, and we're wrapping up now. It's important, and it's really good in the balanced response you gave in relation to Mr. Harmon. But there are people who are saying now, and young people are catching on to this, and I really want you to talk about this before we wrap up. The call and the cry now is, look, the coalition has messed up in office. The persons who would have created the environment and climate for them to go into office were sidelined. We think we should now bring back those persons to carry this struggle, but not to carry this struggle to be sidelined again, but to sit down with those persons and offer them, the positions that they need to have to take this struggle the way they took it in the past, and to ensure that whatever happens, that they can be given the positions that they deserve and they're capable of managing, and also being the vanguard in keeping the wickedness of the PPP at bay, so that we wouldn't have had it. If you were a member of parliament, Mark, there would not have been the Charanda situation. And I'm saying this clear. I'm not saying this because I know you are a great activist. I'm saying this because you knew weeks and weeks before that this thing was being planned at a rum shop somewhere up with the place name. Right? I know that for a fact. And we have to be very responsible because we have assumed a public position, you more than I, that people repose confidence in us. So we don't come on any programs and talk nonsense. We can defend what we sing because it's people's lives and livelihood and their future that we're standing up and fighting for. Your name is being called at the moment as one of the persons that this whole confabulation of the coalition has to be restructured, and yourself, the Sharma Solomons, the Bonds, the Lincoln Lewises, and all these people would have to be empowered in whatever form to now begin this fight, to confront the PPP, and now begin this fight to say to the PPP that you can't assault our women in the halls of the National Assembly. You can't send home professionals in their hundreds. You can't be sacking poor workers at the ambulance service in Linden when we are in a COVID pandemic. And when we look at the signs, 90-something% of the people who are facing this persecution are African Guyanese women and men. It has become so blatant, and you would know that better than I do, that even people who are up in the coalition on state boards and all these things are being chased out, you understand, from their professional position. Amanzo Walton Desir, our professional, was sacked from her job, and so on. Now, Mark, the young people are catching on to this, and people are very sensible. They're saying, look, if 23 years the coalition was out, the PNC was out of office, and it is people who have made that sacrifice over the years, building that platform to eventually see the demise, yourself being one of them. And people are saying it is time for you guys to take that mantle. It is time for an Aubrey Norton to lead. It's time for a Mark Benschop at this crucial juncture, a Sharma Solomon, a Lincoln Lewis to be given power. Even if it's in the parliament, even if it's on whatever. How do you feel? Would you accept that challenge to fight? And do you believe that if that confabulation is put together again, that there's a chance of the PPP falling very early? And that's my final question today. My
You
final
know,
questions.
yeah, thanks for that confidence. But Mark Benschop or Sharma Solomon and so forth, or a Lincoln Lewis cannot be placed in the parliament just like that. We were never part of a list of the list to contest the elections, and so that is definitely out.
Out, yeah.
But I do believe, though, that it's up to the party structure, the leadership of the party, to decide on the way forward. I'm not going to force myself into any system, be it political or otherwise. As you may know, and a lot of your listeners may know, I'm not a member of any of the political parties, PNC, APNU, AFC, or so. I would have supported them, yes. And it doesn't mean that I can't continue playing my role as I have been doing for all those years. However, as you have said in wrapping up, I don't want this impression to be left with here today that the coalition hasn't done anything for the people of Guyana within the 5 years they've been in
Yeah.
office. They have struggled for 2+ years. Initially, they stumbled somewhat by some of them being as arrogant as they were, some of them only focusing on themselves and maybe friends, wealthy friends. I thought that they should have ensured that they empowered their support base, or members of their support base, something that they haven't done. But they have done a heck of a lot compared to the 23 years of the PPP's dictatorship. In less than 5 years, the coalition restored grassroots democracy. So, of course, it wasn't perfect. They held 2 local government elections. When you look across the
Yes.
regions and the rights and the happiness of people of
Security
all
and
ethnic
safety.
persuasions,
Yeah.
right? That air of patriotism was returned. Respectability was returned under David Granger's presidency and the coalition. Um, Extrajudicial killings went down drastically, 99%. Phantom squad killings, death squad killings, drug lords weren't parading as they are once again parading around the country under the PPP. Lots of things, ill things disappeared. Persons' rights were being respected, human rights and workers' rights for the
Totally
most
agree.
part, under the coalition. The radio stations, community radio stations in almost every region, so that people can have access to their own radio stations. Our indigenous brothers and sisters can have access to their own radio stations in their own languages, so forth and so on. Those are things that we've got to be thankful for that the coalition did. Thousands of young people got that opportunity to go to school for free. Their parents didn't have to push their hands in their pockets. At the end of the year, hundreds of thousands of dollars those parents saved. This is not like a propaganda campaign that the PPP has. By when they were in office, they gave a 10,000 to parents every year, school kids, parents every year, and now they've increased it to 15,000. That is not what the Granger administration did. The Granger administration opened doors for lots and lots of possibilities for young people. They got free breakfast, they got free transportation, whether it is through boat, buses, bicycles, whatever. So the accomplishments, achievements of the coalition was tremendous, far more tremendous than what the PPP did for 23 years. Did the coalition make mistakes? Yes, we spoke about the mistakes. They should have been a bit inclusive. They should not have basically excluded individuals who were fighters, people who sacrificed their lives for those very ministers, those very members of parliament, those very officials who sat on state boards and so forth under the coalition. It was people who made those sacrifices for them to be there. And unfortunately, for the most part, those individuals were ostracized. They were basically, the doors were shut on them under the coalition. Let me say this to you, Pablo.
Go ahead. You got
I'll
something.
give this an example. Give an example. I have applied for a radio license for many years. The coalition got into office. They granted folks radio licenses. And I'll say this because I want to say it publicly so that people can get a better understanding as to what really transpired under the coalition. And this is not throwing them under the bus. I'm not going to do that. I still think there is hope for the coalition members, members of parliament, a lot of good ones they have, a
Yeah.
lot of fighters they have. Should they be fighting more? Yes, I
Shara
do believe that.
Duncan and so on. Yeah.
So, so I'm not saying that those folks or these folks are incompetent. I'm not saying that, but they should be fighting more. Let me give you an example. After the no confidence motion, probably that is when they realized that they needed the fighters to be with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
They needed a Lincoln Lewis. They needed a David Hines. They needed others, but it was too late in some instances. Freddie Kissoon done gone. Christopher Ram done gone. The others, it's not like they, they did their role. Don't get me wrong. They played their role, whether small, medium, or whatever, they played their role. And so before the no confidence motion, I was kind of like shocked that even for me under the coalition, that they had no problem in granting me a radio license. They actually took away my radio license. My radio license was taken away under the coalition. They granted me, they took it away, and then when I asked the Guyana National Broadcast Authority, why did you guys revoke my
That's news to
grant
me. That's
license?
news to me.
They said they took my frequency away and give it to Dennis Chabral, Demerara Waves.
Ways.
So when I asked, why would you guys do this? They said because I didn't start up operation after 6 months of being granted the license. I said, but there are scores of other persons who have gotten their radio license 1 year, 2 years, 3, 4, 5 years, and they haven't even started. Why didn't you guys take their license away? Why didn't you guys take their frequency away from them? Why me? And then I was told by an official of the Guyana National Broadcast Authority that, boy, we got to start somewhere. So the somewhere you started by taking away my radio frequency and give it to Dennis Chabral. I don't know.
But you know what, Mark? There seem to be a pattern in the way our leaders in the coalition operate. Sharma Solomon challenged David Granger for the leadership of the party, sideline. Aubrey challenged Hoyt for the leadership of the party, sidelined to this day. You would have formed a political party back then, and you had a right to form that political party when David Granger was opposition leader. And you were doing more work for the people, and so on. And you had formed a political party, and the PNC had felt that you would have been taking away votes from them. And so there seemed to be that kind of mentality or even attitude in spiting persons who would want to exercise their democratic right to challenge and to work to be a part of building the country on behalf of the people. Do you feel at any juncture that would have caused people in the party to be upset with you?
Well, I'm not too sure whether that would have caused them to be upset or so. Because nobody reached out to me in the coalition before I formed that little political group, I would call it. Nobody reached out. I recall I was having lunch with Freddie Kissoon, who loves to eat. And so we were having lunch, and there was this lady who approached us, and she says, there was a meeting. There was a meeting with these guys in the AFC and the APNU and so forth. And they were inviting other people to come on board with them. They invited other smaller parties that are inconsequential, that can't even get 2 votes out there or 1 vote. They invited everybody else. But Kissoon wasn't invited at a meeting. Benschop wasn't invited at that meeting. And I'm sure a Lincoln Lewis wasn't invited at that meeting because there was no need for us. And if somebody says there's no need for you guys, why should you guys just force yourself into something? And so I personally decided to go my own route. There was no malicious intention. I thought then that it was important to have a seat in Parliament to make that difference, so that can able to keep. And I wanted the coalition to win. Mind you, I never campaigned against the coalition. I wanted the coalition to win. But I wanted to have that 1 seat so that we were able to keep the coalition in check. For example, if I had gotten that one seat, there is a possibility that the coalition would have. I'm not. I'm just throwing it
Yes,
out there. I don't want
you're
people
free
to
to
say that
say,
I'm
you're free to
conceited or
express
whatever. That they would have had to work for their constituency. They would
situation.
have had to do even more work, right? It is not like they haven't done anything. The people work. They did a heck of a lot of work. They could have done more, yes. They could have done more for Region 10, heck yes. They could have done more for the people of Linden, heck yes, right? But it wasn't easy getting into office, Norman. And I want you and your listeners, your viewers, to know, across the globe to know, that it wasn't easy for any government to get into office, any party to get into office after 23
Three
years
years.
of brutality, after 23 years of dictatorship, darkship in that country, when we were on the money laundering list, when we were blacklisted, when people were dying left, right, and center, when drug lords were the bosses running the police force and all these different things, when Phantom Squad members were spying on citizens, when citizens were disappearing left, right, and center. All these things were happening when the people were demoralized, when the people were afraid to speak out.
Speak, yeah.
All these things, when Georgetown was a filthy city. Look, the coalition had a heck of a lot of work to do. President Granger had to quickly decide on his future, decide on the vision that he has, and how to implement it. Clean up the city, change the mindset of the people, have them regroup and start to become patriotic, feeling proud of who you are. That, yes, as a government in office now, citizens have a right to speak out.
Yeah.
Freedom of speech is important. Their constitutional rights are important. Those are things that I believe were restored under the
Under
David
the
Granger's
coalition. Yeah.
administration. And we cannot run away with that.
And I
Rome
agree with
wasn't built
that.
in a day.
And
The coalition could have only done so much in that period of time
period.
that they were in office under the circumstances. President Granger and his administration didn't get in there terminating the services of hundreds of individuals because of their ethnicity or because of their perceived political persuasion or connection. It wasn't like that at all. President Granger wanted to govern the country in the interest of all of the people. And that is how a country ought to be governed. Now, there are supporters who are rightfully saying that more should have been done for them. Heck yes, more should have been done for them. But look at what happened. Look at what happened to the coalition in the two plus years. They had to struggle. They had a struggle with an evil opposition,
Position.
an
Yeah.
opposition that will go all out by every illegal means to ensure that they get the seat back of the coalition. And the coalition, I believe, got caught with its pants down. Some of them didn't know how to react. They didn't know how to fight because they didn't have the fighters within them. For the most part, they didn't have the fighters because, as we have alluded to earlier, most of the fighters have been isolated. You have mentioned bringing folks back within the folds. Sharma Solomon and others, they are PNC members.
Yeah.
They were in the folds. They were members. I'm not a member, but I see and I understand the struggle, and I'm with that struggle, right? But what the coalition, what the PNC and the APNU and these guys, including the AFC, what they need to do is to clean up their internal problems, clean up their internal division and their fighting amongst each other within. Clean up the mess within the party. When you guys are cleaned up, then you'll able to know that, hey, guess what? We got to expand. We got to bring back individuals that they deliberately hurt, or some of those individuals cause some form of self-inflicted wounds as well. So you put your differences aside. You say, look, from a leadership standpoint, I cannot see eye to eye, and I'm not going to see eye to eye with everyone. But we must be able to put our political differences aside in the interest of rebuilding the party, rebuilding the coalition. And once there is a strong coalition, then there is hope for Guyana. There is hope for a brighter future for Guyana. There is hope at the next elections, whether it's held next year or the following year, whenever the next elections is held, you know that you have instilled hope. hope within the minds and the hearts of your support base. And outside of that, you're able to impress others who were sitting on the fence. You were able to impress others on the other side as well, that you are a coalition and you will be the coalition that will stand up and ensure that all Guyanese are represented when you get into office. That you're not going to fire 1,500 persons, that you're not going to have an irresponsible CEO of Linden Georgetown Hospital to go there and to say those derogatory things about nurses, and then he is still there. And then when the opposition leader is having a press conference or is speaking out there in Linden, that CEO walks around as though God in heaven knows who he thinks he is, videotaping people and mocking people. It is unacceptable. It should not happen. And I hope that the people of Linden, the nurses, not just the nurses, but the people of Linden and Ituni and Kokwani and other places would know that now is the time to stand up, defend their rights, and ensure that they come out maybe tomorrow, maybe Monday, in their thousands. Of course, social distancing, wear your mask, and to send a message to this regime that the CEO of Linden
Must
Hospital
go.
Complex has to go. End of story. It should happen. But the coalition needs to clean up their act internally. They need to stop the differences that they have with each other and the petty fighting and the picking within, and then reach out to people that they have basically isolated. Reach out to Sharma Solomon. Reach out to others. They don't necessarily have to reach out to me. It's okay. I'm comfortable with what I'm doing, right? But I'm not going to embarrass the coalition publicly. I know that they have made mistakes. I know that they've made some blunders. I know people are calling for the leadership and so forth to go. I know that people are talking about the manner in which the opposition leader conducts himself, that he's not inspiring. I know of all these different things, but also we can make that difference. We can pull these people. We can make them the leaders that we want them to be instead of us sitting down and expecting them to lead us. Sometimes, as a people, from a grassroots standpoint, if we don't take that lead, if we don't try to show these leaders how is it to lead, then we are going to just sit and complain all the time. Let us take that lead. They are servants of the people. So let us just stop looking up to them as though they're some kind of God and that we can't criticize them. Of course, we can criticize them in a respectable manner, mind you, right? I'm not going to call them names and these sort of things, but I'll say this publicly. They need to do more. The people need more action. They need to stand up and represent the 15 or 1,700 persons who have been fired. They need to stand up and properly represent those who have been persecuted at GCOM and other places. That is strong leadership. That is a strong opposition. They need to do that. Are they doing it in the manner in which it should be done? No, they're not. Look, before we go, Norman,
Go ahead.
there's no ifs, ands, or buts about this. The PPP is on a mission to paint the opposition, the coalition, as a rigging party. The PPP has no evidence of that. But every day, that's the picture they're painting. The opposition needs to counter that. Every single day, they need to plaster that, whether social media, whether whatever. Well, they don't have no TV of their own or radio station of their own because, unlike the PPP, they probably didn't think that that was important enough. So they're just left with a little social media, click on live on social media page, or whenever they come on other forums, maybe my radio station or whatever. Outside of that, they need to do more. The leadership needs to do more, way more, Norman. If they don't do more, then the PPP is going to crawl in like thieves in the night, and they're going to grab your weak ones. They're going to grab the weak
It is
ones
already
there,
happening.
and the ones who would go now and open doors for
The
them,
gospels in them.
open car doors and these sort of things for them. And the ones who will have to sing for their supper, who sit on state boards and calling on people to be, they're the ones who are calling and saying that people should be assassinated. Those are dangerous individuals. Not dangerous because they can do something, but their utterances is dangerous because it shows the mindset of these individuals, right? That they are willing to sell themselves and their communities and their people for not even 20 pieces of silver, but just a little piece of silver. You give them a little food, you give them a spoonful of soup, and they're ready. They're ready to sell you out and destroy their own community. That is dangerous. And if the coalition doesn't get its act together, then more and more of those snakes will be crawling out of the coalition. And then when they make their statements, they're going to make it look, because remember, their paymasters are now going to tell them what to say, when to say it, and where to go and say it. So this is what they're going to say. As that guy who recently crawled out, right? That opportunist who recently crawled out
Lennox
of his
Gasper.
hole to say that he left the PNC or the
Because
PNCR
they're riggers.
because of rigor. Come on, there is no evidence of that. None whatsoever. In fact, the evidence points in the direction that the PPP has rigged the 2020 elections. 47 plus boxes, questionable in PPP stronghold. So they knew what they were doing, the PPP that is, in attempting to paint the PNC as though they're the riggers. Norman, the PPP has a history of rigging all of the elections in Guyana from the 1960s, when they rigged that Houston seat and denied Hamilton Green from it, right? They have a history of rigging. The 1992 elections, obviously rigged. The 1997 elections, rigged, when it was finally vitiated by Claudette Singh in 2001. Vitiated means null and void. It was rigged. The 2006 elections, the PPP rigged the elections. They robbed the people of Region 10 a seat. Sam Hines sat in that seat, a seat that he never won. And they had no shame. These vagabonds, these political vagabonds, are now talking about rigged elections. In 2011, they attempted to rig the elections again, but they got caught. Here how they got caught. They attempted to give themselves an extra seat, which would have placed them in the majority. But because they got caught right there at GCOM, and the then CEO, Mr. Gokul Budu, had no other choice but to concede and say, yes, it was wrong. They knew what they were doing. Hence, the minority government by Donald Ramotar. They attempted to rig the elections then. In 2015, it was caught up with them. So they couldn't rig it. But they went back on the drawing board and they did their homework as to how they are going to rig the 2020 elections. So when they realized that they were rigging the elections and that Mr. Mingo probably was calling out accurate numbers, mind you, there's no evidence to substantiate anything otherwise. They started, because it was a well planned out something, they stormed the GCOM office. Nobody shot them, nobody killed them, nobody murdered them. And I'm not saying anybody should have done so either. Unlike what they did to those protesters, those innocent, unarmed protesters at the office of the president, the same way we started the program. Nobody did that to them. So they had a plan. What the coalition needs to do is to counter this nonsense that the PPP is peddling about rigged elections, and all this nonsense. Look, opposition leadership, wake up. Wake up. People are constructively criticizing you guys. I've seen some of the criticisms. Some I believe should be done privately, but everybody has a way of doing their thing. And I'm not
people are emotional and angry at the moment.
Exactly. But the coalition needs to decide on what they want. Whether they want to be a paper opposition, a press release opposition, or just a press conference opposition. They have to make that decision. If they do stay in doing what they're doing now, they probably can be considered of inflicting this self-inflicted wound to their possible demise. I'm not saying they should, but they should do better, way better. They should stop ostracizing people. Somebody mentioned, and you mentioned it earlier, that they said that some of them have continued with their same arrogance. I would agree with that individual. If those arrogant persons are listening today, they need to change from their arrogant ways right now. They need to be more inclusive. I know some of them, and they haven't changed. Some of them. That's all I have to say now.
Mark Anthony Benschop needs no introduction. He is a political activist, renowned, very popular, and talking about inclusivity, including each other and sharing the platforms on uniting, I want you to just quickly tell my viewers how they can get on to your show. I think you do a nightly show. It is WW Benschop Radio. Just in
Yeah,
10
that's it.
seconds, so that my viewers can tune in to hear what your interviews with other guests and so on. And hopefully very soon I can come on your show also, and very soon that you can come back. It has been a pleasure. It is one of my greatest pleasure, and I'm not saying it, lightly, to have you on this program. It is a great pleasure to have you here on this program, and hopefully you will be back soon. So let us so how can they contact you? What is still
Let me say this to you, Norman, before you go, and to your listeners, so that they can have an understanding that we speak from a position of an example that we are setting. You and I don't see eye to eye on a lot of, well, I wouldn't say a lot of issues, on some issues. But when you placed a call for me, I didn't quickly put up a blinker and say, I'm not going to return a call to Norman Brown because we haven't spoken to each other in months, and I don't have time. No, there are times when differences have to be put aside
sorry.
in the interest of the bigger picture.
Thank you very
What is the
much.
bigger picture? The country. What is the bigger picture the coalition has to be asking themselves? It's the people, their support base. How do they get their support base back together? How do they keep their support base stronger? How do they address the issues affecting their support base, so that their support base would be energized and would be able to say, yes, we like this struggle. We are going to join the struggle. We are not going to allow the PPP to trample upon our rights again. We're not going to allow the PPP to allow these flatfoot hustlers who are collecting their brown paper bags to form phantom squad groups, and those who have been in those groups to come back and drive fear
And
in
it's
that
getting
country.
there.
It should not. I see the hustlers them.
Yeah.
Some of them sit in state boards and all
Yeah.
these sort of things. They feel they're powerful. And I want to say this to the people of Linden. Linden is very close to my heart as well. It's where my navel string is buried, at the Mackenzie Hospital. I'm not like one of them who just probably walked into Linden and Linden rescued them. No, Linden is my tongue as well.
Oh, you used
Right?
to go by a house in the back street by which name too.
That
The lane gotta be there to you.
that what places like Linden have to be, the people of Linden have to be careful about, is these flatfoot hustlers who do not have Linden's interest at heart are going to now walk around Linden trying to brainwash Lindeners into believing that because
Very
the
true.
PPP goes into Linden, is that why this is a good project, by this thing is good. Me is which government? I want development for this me tongue. This is development. No, it is not development. It is like if the devil, remember the devil had Jesus Christ, those who believe in the Bible
Yeah.
stories and so forth. Jesus was on the mountaintop, and the devil said to Jesus, look at all these things in the world.
Yes.
All you have to do is prostrate on me, worship me, and I will give you all of these things in the world. Jesus said no. But what these flatfoot hustlers, these brown paper baggers are doing, they're collecting the crumbs from these PPP guys, and they're satisfied with the crumbs, and they believe that with the crumbs that they're getting, they're better off now. This is development. I never got crumbs from the coalition. This is betterment now. So
Yes.
they're going to walk around Mackenzie Market. They're going to walk around Wisma Market. They're going to cross with the boats and all these different things, and they're going to sit down and attempt to brainwash people. Look at it this way. This is development. What the PNC did for y'all, coalition been in government all them years, what it did for y'all. But like I've said earlier, the coalition wasn't that perfect, but what they were able to do is to remove the fear. There are
Remove the
thousands
fear.
of people
Place
who are
value on human life.
exactly.
That is something I've
And
always said.
were they not cheated out of office?
They
I
were,
think
in my estimation.
in the second term, the coalition would have done a heck of a lot of good. Put aside some of the arrogant ones in the coalition, and the self-serving ones in the coalition. Look at the big picture. They would have done far better than their first term in office. Unfortunately, the coalition, the PPP guys, they have no interest in development. 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 They have no interest in develop The PPP rigged the elections, and we have the coalition now have to fight to get back into office. And I'm optimistic because this PPP regime is not doing a heck of a lot of good. Their supporters are upset. Lots of their supporters are upset because they cannot deliver what they have promised to the sugar workers. The billions of dollars going into the sugar industry, Gaisuko, the ordinary workers aren't getting that. It's the fat cats in Gaisuko and Gaisuko boards and so forth. They're the ones who are enjoying this sweetness. When you look at the contracts handed out to their friends and cronies, it is not the ordinary PPP supporters are benefiting. So the PPP supporters themselves are upset. They're very upset. They don't like what they're seeing. That is why, Norman, it is important that the coalition get its damn act together and stand up for all the people's rights. Be stronger as a coalition. And at the next polls, you will see the people going out to vote. You don't have to beg them to go out and vote. They will go out and vote. And I take this time, Norman, to thank you so much. Continue your work, continue with your platform as well, and to thank all of your listeners, whether they're in Guyana, whether in the diaspora, wherever they are. Thank you guys so much for listening to us. You've asked persons who want to listen to my program. Some of them I see are friends on my page, my Facebook page. We have a Facebook page, Benschop Radio. I'm on Monday through Friday from 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. Guyana time to 10 o'clock. So they can join me. We'll have more of that. And
very much.
Sometimes I'll have you as a guest as well.
Very soon. I look forward to that. And I have to say quickly that even the coalition online program would have invited me several times, and I have been on their program, and so I am there to fight the PPP because I know the PPP is an evil regime. Mark Anthony Benschop, political activist, freedom fighter, a veteran in the business, a television host, radio station owner, everything. Mark Benschop here on Voice of the Diaspora, one who has suffered, but one who has continued to this day in the struggle. Thank you for being on Voice of the Diaspora.
One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed.
When I came through the gate as a free man, it was new to me. I was never sentenced, really, It's just that the ruling party didn't like the fact that I was highlighting a lot of the ills in society in terms of shortchanging the ordinary man, injustices, extrajudicial killings, and all these things. Was pain. There were lots of pain from within, knowing that my family had suffered. Walking out on that day, having not been out for several years, being locked up, locked away, hardly get sunlight. It was new for me. That said, I was very hesitant to accept the pardon because I felt that, hey, I never committed any crime. The government knows that. I decided, and upon hundreds of prisoners saying, Benschop, you've been in prison for a while, you've been locked away in solitary confinement. Accept the pardon, man. You could go out here and you could help fight for us. I haven't been away from my son for about 5 years, that it's time that he has his dad back with him. So I made that decision that I'm going to go out there, continue fighting against injustices, and continue fighting for the people, and also get to reunite my son.
I have a dream.